Could you tell me a little bit about your favorite artist or piece of art?
An artist I am loving as of late is Madeline Rupard. She does a lot of work painting like pretty mundane scenes like gas stations or State Street in such a sentimental and beautiful way.
Yeah, favorite artist would probably be Jake Wyatt. He's the showrunner for My Adventures with Superman.
One of my favorite artists is Hieronymus Bosch. He's famous for paintings like The Garden of Earthly Delights. Just you can sit and look at a Hieronymus Bosch painting and go through every single centimeter of it and find new meaning out of it. And also be amazed at how strange it is.
Favorite like non-comic artist is Alphonse Mucha, because every time I see his work, I'm like, wow, it's magical. And the world gets a little bit better.
What's up, Leapers? We've decided as a show that we're going to start calling you Leapers as our fan base, which is kind of fun. I don't know. Let me know. You can send a little DM on Instagram at Take a Leap Podcast. Tell me your thoughts about it. Take a Leap is the show at BYU Radio that is interested in young people of faith, how they're merging their everyday faith life and personal life. My name is Leah. I'm co-hosting with Josh Orton.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Josh. And we're so excited to be joined today by Gracie Morbitzer. Hi, Gracie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Do you want to start just by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am an artist based in Columbus, Ohio. My project is called The Modern Saints. And in this project, I take the ancient icons of saints that we're familiar with, and I try to portray those historical figures as people as if they were living today. So what they might look like if they were walking around in the 21st century. And this is so that we can relate to them more and realize that we can all be saints too.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's super cool. When did you first get into painting? Like, were you one of those kids in the corner at school who would just like be painting by themselves? Like, what did that look like?
Yes, that was definitely me. Actually, I think maybe this is the time to make my confession that I'm the one who drew a face on the wall in kindergarten. I never fessed up to that.
Better late than never. It's okay.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that was always me. My family was also really creative, which I really thank them for inspiring me. They never forced me into it or said that I need to be an artist, but they were just always coming up with these big ideas on their own. My dad was in architecture, also did painting on the side. My mom was just super creative, especially with storytelling. And yeah, so that was, and they just always were willing to go along with my big ideas too, which I think was another really big influence for me. You know, when I wanted to create an entire volcano on the driveway at home, they were okay with that. So I thank them a lot for that. During school, I actually would say that that creative spark was dimmed a little bit. I had some art classes where I actually failed a lot of projects, probably because I was breaking the rules, trying to be too creative, you know? So it was never even something I considered going to college for, even while I was in high school.
Wow.
Right. I love talking about failing the classes because you're trying to be too creative. My mom is also very artistic. Shout out to my mom. When you were talking about growing up and doing different crafts, I was reminded of this time that my mom made us save all of the toilet paper rolls for months. And then the time finally came and we painted these toilet paper rolls and attached magnets to the back and then made a marble track on our fridge. And I've never met anyone else who did that little project, but I appreciated it. And I think she's the reason that I'm not as creative as you, but I dabble in, doodling when I'm supposed to be taking notes in class. So can you tell us a little bit about how painting in high school and college, or I guess just high school, and then why you decided to do it in college as well? I
actually went to college for interior architecture and design.
Cool.
That was, again, because I didn't think I could make it in the world as an artist. That's not, something I was used to being around, something I thought was very common. And I was also really interested in museums and set design. So that's what I focused on while I was there. I still love that work and all the research that goes into it. And that's something that I did work in for a full year after graduating. And this project, The Modern Saints, was really just a side project that I did for fun while I was in college. And it had just started taking off so much by the time that I graduated that I ended up having to leave that full-time job when they were about to lay everybody off anyway. And I took that leap of faith to really say, I think I'm going to try and do this full time instead of finding something new.
Great timing. So this project, I mean, I was kind of a stalker and I just looked at all of them. And I do think it is really cool because it's these are definitely people that I could see on the street. And these are people that I feel I know. When you're going through the process of creating a modern saint and painting them, what type of research goes into, like, how do you make the decisions on how they're going to look? You know, what type of research kind of goes into the pre-painting?
Yeah, so I think I would actually spend the most time on research out of any step in the painting process. They're really pretty tiny, and I've gotten so used to painting them that they don't take long to physically create. But as I mentioned, I love research, I love history, and so I really try to learn anything about this person that I can, whether it's straight facts from books and online resources, or reading a bunch of blog posts by really vastly different websites, and trying to just really get a grasp of who this person would be if they were still today. Do they remind me of anyone that I know? Do they do the work of people that I know, organizations that I know? And what would they be wearing too? What would their style be? How would they express who they are based on things that I learned about their life? So what were their skills? What were they interested in? What causes did they really care about? And who does that remind me of today? And that process, I would say, is probably my favorite part, honestly. And then I create a reference board with a lot of image research of people who live today in the area that they would have lived in, people who remind me of the energy that they sort of gave off in their story, folks that I know that remind me of the person, and then also just some sort of symbolism to say something about who they were. And that can be in their clothing, the colors that I use, their hairstyle, or all of the above.
Awesome.
That's so cool. I'm wondering, what has the response been to these paintings? Like, are people saying this is such a cool and new approach to artwork and seeing the saints, or do you have any skeptics?
Yes, so the response has definitely been very mixed throughout the whole path of this project, for sure. While I was in art school and creating these pieces, they seemed to be a little bit too religious for a secular space. You know, I would have people who would come up to me at art fairs and be really interested in them. But the rest of the response was kind of just either unenthusiastic or just uninterested, I would say. But then upon graduating, when I would go to art fairs that were maybe sponsored by churches or youth ministries or something like that, sometimes they would be seen as a little bit too secular for those spaces. So it always seemed to be crossing a very fine line. But then once I moved most things online, started my social media account and website, that's really where I found this audience that I think was really interested in seeing the saints look like this, who were interested in a much more open and loving message that these saints have to offer us. And also a message that's really focused on social justice, which I think these saints were. And we forget that sometimes when they're not, looking very rambunctious, looking very passive and historic. But I thought for the longest time that I was the only one who was able to picture them this way, the only one who realized that they were probably different than we would have thought. And so finding that online community has just been so wonderful. Hearing all these ideas from others who also appreciate them for the same reasons, or who are coming around to appreciate them for those reasons in a new light. That's just been really nice. And then, of course, I have had some negative responses online as well. A lot of blasphemy and just thinking that it was irreverent to portray the saints this way. But I really just always want to stress that none of this is out of disrespect. It's because I think that the saints deserve more respect than they're even given now. So yeah, it's definitely mixed, but I appreciate the good with the bad, because at least I know because of that it is doing something. No one would be upset about anything if it wasn't powerful enough to have some sort of message in there that was worth the anger.
Yeah, for sure. It's making people feel, a sense of emotion and feel a specific way, which is powerful. I love this conversation of finding your audience. And we did an interview a little while back. In episode 2, we talked to the soloists. They're podcasters as well. And they talked about going where the beautiful people are. And if you can't find a space to go, then create it. And I think that's what you've done in bridging these two, like our modern era and the saints. So.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah. I really hope that's what I'm doing. That's what I aim to do. I know that there's so many ideas that these saints have that have been forgotten or that are just really still relevant to us today. And I think it's important for us to remember that and to find hope in knowing that whatever we're going through, there's a saint that's done it before. And now they are lifted up as role models, and we can be there too.
You've painted a lot of these. How many have you painted? in this series? So
about 150 at this
Holy
point.
cows.
And still working.
And do you have a painting that like sticks out to you or is maybe your favorite of these 150?
Yeah. So because there are so many, I feel like I answer this question differently every time I do an interview,
Right.
just because, I always have more. And of course, my first answer is always that no, I can't pick one. Like there are like children, like I can't have a favorite. And I'm not sure that I do have a favorite, but there are some that stand out for different reasons. I think that one that I always mention is Saint Stephen. He's one that stands out because that was the first time that I decided to allow whatever, quote unquote mistakes were happening in the process to just be and like see that as like the spirit guiding me instead of me forcing my way into the process to make it look exactly like this image I had in my head. And as I mentioned, I didn't really have any formal painting classes or training or anything. So, I'm not necessarily the best artist around, and I know that, but I think that this project has a strong enough message to want to continue doing it at any cost, and really deciding to allow the piece to be what it's going to be was a big turning point in that process, because ever since that time, I really have enjoyed how they turn out much better than when I work on them for weeks and weeks to get them to look a very specific, certain way that I had in mind. And then another that I think really stood out to me was Saint Hildegard of Bingen. I always mention her because she is now my favorite saint. And creating the commission of her is what really led me to her, which I think that was another great experience as well. I didn't know anything about her at the time. And she also had just really recently become a saint at that time as well. And so learning that there was this woman who had lived in the Middle Ages who created every type of thing possible and never stopped working and cared about women and the environment, that was incredible to me because, again, I found this sort of friendship or like companionship in this person in the past who had the same goals and motivations that I do. And again, I think that really brings us a lot of hope. And then since then, some of the newer ones, honestly, have really been my favorite as well, because those I have decided to create after spending even more time in research than what I was used to, and really just kind of change up my whole process of creating them as well. So I learned a lot about traditional iconography over the last couple of years that I didn't even know when I was starting this project. And taking some more of those factors into consideration when creating has also influenced that idea as well. One of them is making sure that the space that I put myself in while creating is somewhat separate from the rest of the world. I think that that's pretty important because then you can really see it as more of a prayerful and meditative process of creating as well. And I definitely see it that way. And some of the ways I do that is picking a playlist that I think this person would have listened to, even coming up with an outfit or a lunch that this person might have eaten. Yeah, I'm really just trying to get into the headspace of who they would be.
That's so cool. I love the prayerful and meditative aspect that you talk about.
Yeah, that is awesome. Okay, so we both took the quiz on your website to see like which saint you are. I'm proud to say that I'm Mary Magdalene, which I didn't know. I didn't expect. I didn't know what to expect, I guess, but I was like, all right, so sweet. Leah, what were you again?
Yeah, I got Saint Catherine of Alexandria.
Okay,
Yeah.
Awesome. We were wondering, we're like, all right, we should ask Gracie what she is. So Gracie, what are you?
Those are both good answers. I would say that I'm probably St. Luke. I haven't taken it for myself because I had to make it,
Right.
so I probably would have skewed the answers a little bit. But he's our other patron saint, and that's because he was supposed to have been the first iconographer. And I also love him because his gospel in the Bible is much more focused on the stories of women, the stories of the suffering and the oppressed, and really letting people speak who aren't allowed to speak in other stories.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm thinking still about all of the research that you say you do, like researching for 150 saints. I just cannot wrap my mind around. And I'm wondering if there's anything from your research that stands out as a surprise or anything that really changed the way you felt about a saint, or just anything surprising, I guess, that you found in your research.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think every time I do this research, I'm surprised by at least something. And that is one of the reasons why I love to do it, because I always have a much different perspective about this person than I would have in the first place. One of the things that I think is so fascinating is that a lot of these saints had ideas that were directly contradictory to another saint, or maybe they knew each other and didn't even get along in their time. And I think that's really powerful because it shows us, how much space there is within our own faith to have these different ideas from each other and still have some sort of value to that idea. Something else that I think is really interesting is that so many of them just really were so involved in every aspect of their community, in taking care of them, in establishing social services for them when they were needed. And I think that these traditional images we have of them don't give us that idea, of them walking around literally in the mud, to help people and walking from town to town to spread messages. They certainly don't look like that in their perfectly pressed habits or robes or whatever, carrying flowers. And then another thing I would say that has been interesting to learn about them that I wasn't expecting is just how vastly different all of their ideas of their faith were as well. The way that they lived them out, what they thought was important, the way that they wanted to share it or not share it. It's really very different from person to person, which you might not expect. And I think that is also super interesting because it shows us that there's not one way to be a Christian too. There's not one way to be a person of faith. And that's just also very, very hopeful.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get caught in this idea that like, ooh, if I am a member of this church or if I am a Christian, then I have to look a certain way or I have to be a certain way. And that not only affects like how we view ourselves, but like, oh, if someone in our congregation doesn't fit that, then, there might be judgment there. And I think it's super important that we recognize, look, no, these people are just as much Christian as I am, or they're children of God too, and kind of separate those things, like our own social expectations from what God sees. And I think that your Saints Project absolutely does that. It seems like most of your time would be spent doing these 150 plus works for the modern saints. But do you notice a difference from when you're doing something, a project that has religious kind of connotations or is religious versus a more secular kind of art project? Do you notice a difference when, in the prep / execution?
I'd say so for sure. I mean, I have created plenty of projects in my free time that have really deep meaning to me. Things that have to do with family history or some social cause that's really important to me. But I would say there's still a difference for sure. And I'm not always sure what that is exactly. But one thing I will say is that I thought for sure I would get really tired of working on this Saints project really early on, especially because of how many there are, how similar it seems like they would all be. But there's just new things that I learn and discover with every single one of them that really motivates me to keep going. And I think some of that has to do with this new information and these new perspectives that I gained from the research. But I also think it's just something that's really good for my soul. I think it really takes care of it in getting to express myself, use a gift that I have to give back to others and share something that I think is really important. And I think that is always something that I will be more willing to create than any other project for sure.
We've touched on this a little bit, like we talked about your prayerful preparation and the paintings touching your soul, but I'm wondering if you could make just a very definite connection between what you're doing with the Modern Saints Project and your individual faith.
Sure. So I would say that at first it started out sort of like what you were mentioning, where it was to give a new perspective to those around me, whether they were within the church or outside of the church, trying to lessen the judgment of others. I had sort of a huge deconstruction of my faith once I got to college because things were so much different than what I was used to growing up in Catholic school. And I wasn't really sure what I believed about my faith anymore, how it fit into my life, if it was even important, if all of it was something I still believed in or not. And becoming a resident advisor on my campus was one of the biggest turning points for me because I got to learn the stories of all of the students around me. And what they reminded me of was the stories of the saints, a lot of whom were also judged by Christians, a lot of whom were misunderstood, maybe subjected to the Inquisition in their time. So for my community, that was my first goal, was to have this new way into dialogue, this new way into questions, with the vehicle of the saints to facilitate that and seeing them differently to even get into that dialogue in the first place. But for me personally, I think that is what has become even more important more recently and over the years, because right when I graduated was also the middle of the COVID pandemic. And so again, like not being able to go to places of worship in person, not being able to have a physical community around me, and then transitioning from this hectic world of school into just staying home and doing nothing all the time, that was a huge, huge change for me, as it was for so many people. And in that time of still not being sure where I stood on my faith and everything, it really is what kept me a faithful person, I really believe, because so many things were happening that I didn't agree with in the larger church society and that I wasn't happy about. But having this simple faith and wisdom from these saints that I was learning about and having this project to steady me and keep me grounded is really what kept me in it, I'm very sure. So it's been impactful for both me and my larger community, for sure.
Would you have any advice for young people who want to express their faith in creative ways?
Yes. So I always say that I really hope that by the time I am finished with all of this project, I'm not the only one to have done it, not necessarily this project specifically, but to create art and design and music and projects and organizations that are faith-based, that help others to see their faith in a new way. When I give a presentation to high school and middle school students, it's about discovering your own gifts and how you can take those and use those for your faith, even if there's something that doesn't seem like, something that typically a saint would do, or something that you can't necessarily outright help people by doing, And I always encourage them to see what they're doing, even if it's very tiny, even if it's the smallest thing, as if they are doing it for their faith, if they're doing it out of love, then they are doing it correctly. I always give the story of St. Christopher, who was this really large guy described as a giant sometimes. And he wanted to be a Christian, but didn't know how to practice his faith and love. And so he asked a monk who told him to fast and pray. And he wasn't good at that, apparently. So he said, well, use what you have for your faith and it will have its effect. And so he decided to help people cross this river that was really dangerous, where people were drowning. And just by doing that, he was already feeling fulfilled. He was saving lives, or at least just lessening the burden in someone's day, and I think that is always something that is out of love and something for our faith. But then there's this story of a miracle where he carries this small child across the river. It gets heavier and heavier, thinks he's not going to make it. On the other side, he reveals that he's like baby Jesus and was carrying the weight of the world across the river, and that sort of confirms that he was doing this for others, for strangers he didn't know. But that's like Jesus and all of us, and so his was like a story of success, even though it seemed like something that he wasn't doing for his faith. It was. So that's what I would always encourage anyone to do with their faith at all. And if you're a creative person, I would say to take that one step further and use the creativity you have to create more heaven on earth. There's a really awesome quote from St. Hildegard about using what we have, what we are given, and who we are authentically. And when we do that, we do create a little bit of this heaven on earth. And that's all of our goals, is make our home and our community and world a better, more loving and open place. So yeah, I would definitely give that advice. And then I would also say to just be true to yourself, be as authentic as you can, because that is something that others are going to appreciate, something that they're going to realize is honest, but also something that they probably need. Again, I mentioned that I didn't think anyone else had these ideas that I had at first when I started. And I'm so happy to admit now that I was definitely wrong about that. So
I love that. Thank you so much. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up everything we've said in the interview, honestly. I love the discussion of heaven on earth, and I think art is such a beautiful way to do that. Gracie, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Gracie Morbitzer for speaking to us today. To see some of the artwork we talked about, or to take the infamous Saints quiz, I know you want to, visit themodernsaints.com. While you're on the web, hop on over to Take a Leap Instagram and YouTube pages at Take a Leap Podcast. Making funny content for all of you is how I express myself artistically, and I know that Josh and Aaliyah and James have a great time making TikToks with me. And yes, for those of you wondering, I have touched glitter in the last 24 hours. It's who I am, okay? Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week with another stellar episode of Take a Leap. Have the best day. Bye-bye.